Of the second Warsaw Open. In opening element from Greece and Poland, we have the Bordello. In opening opposition from Poland, we have tourists. In closing government, we have from Romania and some bizarre combination of Greece and England, we have Oxford. And from the Turkish Empire and the German Empire, we have, what was it now? The Pope who drinks vodka. Congratulate all four teams for reaching this final. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to call upon our Honorable Prime Minister to open this debate. Hear, hear.
Thank you for the floor, Mr. Speaker. With a pleasure, I would like to open the debate about the possibility to host a new group of people coming from United States to Europe. I would like to build firstly the parallel between the Syrian situation and the African Americans in the U.S. I would like to show you that in fact we need to have this kind of refugee asylum, and I would like to show you that there are several reasons why it's a very similar situation. And because the refugee asylum is a kind of principle of respecting the human rights and international law, we would like to show you that the EU should take care of them. Secondly, I would like to show you why we can host them. So why the situation of this African Americans will be better, and the mechanisms that we are having to help them. And thirdly, no thank you. And thirdly, why we should do that. So what we could gain in fact from this situation. I will show you several reasons for that. So firstly, let's build this parallel between the Syria and the situation of African Americans in the U.S. Firstly, both of them are exposed to violent actions, and of course we've got this recent example of Ferguson case, and we see that there is a strong debate about overusing of violence in the U.S. and that the black people are discriminated just because of their race. So this is this violence which is like connected with the brutally, with using the armed actions. But also they're exposed to violence which is maybe not so visible, but this is of course the hate speech. This is the discrimination built by special districts in cities, the special ways of having the black schools for children. So it starts in the very beginning when the children are raised in this thought that in fact we've got this strong division in the society, and it's very visible, especially that in America in Europe, in contrary to America, we're having a very mixed society with a large number of minorities. In America, it looks rather like we've got two sides of the society, and this parallel is very, very visible, and it's very hard to integrate with both sides. The second thing in this refugee parallel, thank you, is the economical instability. And because of the discrimination in the workplace, because of the special districts, because of lower abilities to have better education, they are exposed on this unstable economical income. And this is also connected with the refugee asylum, because we would like to have the permanent permission for stay and having the work, which is connected, of course, also with Syria case. And third thing is this principle of human rights. We do believe that EU should take care of it, because it would have the strong voice and strong opinion that we are not agree on this kind of process, and we are dividing the two societies, especially in a very some kind of developed democracy, developed liberal democracy. But in fact, it's not working because these people are exposed to this strong discrimination. Here you are.
The way we process asylum seekers to make them refugees is that we take them on a case-by-case basis, and evaluating their claims will give them the right to live. It's not about giving it outright the right to anyone to
get your point, but we do see that these people are quite necessary for us, and I will show you this in my They've got the language skills, they knew English, they have some background education which is provided by American system, and they're, well, it's very hard to say that we would like, it's unfair a bit to compare the value of immigrants, but frankly speaking we should do that, and we would like to show you that these American immigrants can be much more better for Europe than, for example, from Africa or from poor part of Asia. Like, we need to take care of everyone, but if we are exposed in this crisis situation, we do believe that this kind of immigrant can give us the boost, economical boost. I will go back to this argument another day. So the second thing is also the better mechanisms of avoiding discrimination. We can do this because we have developed the special mechanisms. For example, when we are looking for a job, the CVs are written in some kind of blank way. You don't have even your surname written on the CV, and we do believe that these people can quite easily integrate. Also, we've got the very good system of engaging people, for example, by having them in different districts of the city, avoiding to having gap. And the third thing is also that what can opposition said, that there are 30 million of black people and they are all coming to the Europe. We don't think it's necessarily true, because there will be only young people who are looking for new possibilities, who are exposed on this problem of unemployment, especially when they're young. And thirdly, that they are ready to move and have and take the responsibility by themselves, and because they've got this background that I mentioned before, we do believe that they won't overuse the social security system, because they would like to find a job and they would like to have better conditions than they're having in America. And fourthly, why we should do that? Firstly, because we've got this maybe historical responsibility on the slave trade by Spain or UK, and we should take responsibility of that. Secondly, because we need these young people and we need the economical boost. Now US is kind of recovering from the crisis. We're still stuck, especially, for example, in France, when there are no possibilities to move this way or this way. And thirdly, because we're engaging the motivated people who would like to join the Europe and who know how Europe is working, because Europe is very attractive district for Americans. And we do believe that this new policy can help either this African Americans in the US, either Europe.
Thank you, Prime Minister, very much. And I'd like to call the Leader of Opposition to open for her bench. Hear him.
Okay. So this is a ridiculous policy that will permanently destabilize the EU. It will harm US-EU relations at a moment where they are crucial for the success of Western liberal democracy. They will most certainly cause the UK to leave the European Union, and probably other nations as well if the entire European Union implode. And lastly, it will significantly worsen the status of all other minorities that will remain in the States, because apparently African Americans are the only minority in this United States. Okay, so before I get onto those points, a bit of rebuttal. I think the points about integration and historic responsibility will come later. But with the comparison of asylum status, as my partner has already pointed out with you, you cannot make this comparison firstly because the asylum status is granted on a case-by-case basis. In cases of extreme violence, where you are not able to exist in the country because you will be killed or you will be put into prison, right? The entire African American population of the United States is not in danger of being killed tomorrow. Yes, the system is extremely biased. Yes, the justice system does not punish policemen enough. This is not an analogy to a war situation where you are going to be systematically tried to be killed for your ethnicity. African Americans can still vote. African Americans can get protection in the justice system. This is not an asylum case, all right? What this may be, it would be in terms of getting the skilled workers for the immigration policy, we do not think is a very good comparison, because obviously the kind of immigrants that would actually come, they would be motivated first of all, because they do perceive the discrimination against them, and they would hope that the justice systems in the EU are less so, but also because, like, obviously the welfare state in the EU is much better. So probably the kind of people who come are the poorest and least skilled. Now, as they have said, in terms of integration, like, they are English speakers, right? The only English-speaking nation in the European, or the biggest European English-speaking nation in the European Union is the UK. And also, like, the UK is on the brink of leaving the European Union, all right now, before this policy because of immigration. Nigel Farage and UKIP is throwing the shitstorm just because of, like, European immigrants. The moment you open this blanket policy for, even, and we do agree, only a block of, like, immigrants from the United States would come, but this would be completely blown out of proportion, and, like, whichever party wins the next elections, there would have to be a referendum, and the UK would leave. Like, that is if, like, every single right-wing party in the EU is anti-immigration, is racist, and with this kind of additional influx to the rhetoric, as they are already rising, would severely destabilize the European Union. So, like, we don't think that we're going to need to defend this, but just very quickly why the European Union is good for Europeans and generally the world, right? It offers judicial revision, significantly increases human rights. There's a shared economic market, which increases the bargaining power. There's, like, also a certain amount of diplomatic union to rival the US and China, which, like, generally increases like, Western liberal democracy foreign policy. And it also has a strong democratizing effects on nations around the European Union that want to join. A lot of really strong benefits that are going to be severely undermined by your policy. Okay, so moving on to, like, the actual economic status of the European Union, right? We have had several years of strong austerity measures that have already significantly undermined the welfare state. The moment, like, people see that even more undermined, and, like, obviously this would be exactly the kind of decision that would be perceived becoming for Brussels, completely undemocratically imposed on nations, right? And this would have exactly the kind of backlash that we need to avoid in order to preserve the integrity of the European Union and all of its good effects. No, thank you. Okay, so going on to US-European relations, which I remind you are crucial at the moment with the rising China and an aggressive Russia. The reason, like, the United States, which generally, all of the rhetoric about foreign policy is we are overstretched, right? Like, we should not be helping other people because America, like, is probably the only country, and we're kind of skeptical that other countries exist. Like, the moment where the only reason that there's a strong alliance and a strong feeling of, like, brotherhood with the European Union is that Americans think of them as just like us, right? They are our friends, they are a traditional friend, like, they are traditional brothers. The moment you get this really strong, targeted criticism of American racism, which is a really sore spot, the moment you feel that your closest international allies are turning against you, it will lead to a flood of a withdrawal from Europe, a lack of any willingness to, like, join with them economically, a lack of any willingness to support them against Russian, like, aggression. Yes?
And like Farage, are you just going to shout millions will come, or will you actually give us analysis of, like, how many numbers you expect of immigrants?
Well, we pretty much agree with opening government that it will be, like, a good chunk of African Americans, enough to decrease their voting power in the United States, and like, enough to put a strain on the welfare system. We don't think every single African American will leave, because obviously the differences in economic opportunities are not great. Okay, but going back to, So, like, just a reminder, this is an especially bad time for this kind of strain on US-EU relations, and that is exactly how it will be taken by the US media. Okay, and now lastly, so this is a policy that is meant to help African Americans in the United States. It is extremely ill-conceived and will not have that effect, but that is the intent, right? The problem is that not all minorities are included, and not all African Americans will leave. What will happen is that those who have the greatest perception of the injustice in the system, and those who have the greatest awareness of the political system, and so have the biggest chance to actually change that, will leave, losing that political capital, and also losing votes that will support, that will raise the status of minorities in the United States. That would be like a triumph for the racists, who all that racists ever wanted prosecuted is you have the potential for the capital, you have the potential for change. This would undermine the relations, bilateral relations, undermine the European Union, and worsen the situation in the States. Thank you.
I thank the Leader of Opposition very much. I call now upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue for his speech. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning we stood up here and told you that the national state system has taken upon itself to offer protection to people that are suffering from physical violence, and we see the situation of African Americans being extremely powerful. The opposition teams complain going like, oh, but we're outside on a case-by-case basis, ignoring the reality that the case-by-case basis when it comes to Syrians is usually just an interview that questions whether or not, first of all, they're from Syria, second of all, do they belong to the Assad government. We imagine an interview process would be necessary to determine whether or not someone's African American or whether or not, you know, they just happen to claim to be one. Now, they say asylum is not comparable because if you're in Syria, there's war and you'll probably die anyway, without telling us what beyond the color of their skin unites the people that have been shot dead by police in the United States of America, who are victims of government violence as much as the Syrian population in Syria are victims of government violence. Moreover, they ignore the economic violence that my partner talks about, right? These people have no access to the labor market the same way white people do in the United States, or even Hispanic people do in the United States, right? They don't have access to educational opportunities the same way. Generally, there is another government-sponsored system of violence that holds these people behind. We think asylum is very much comparable in this case, and it's about time we stopped looking at cases only when, like, you know, millions of people were getting, like, physically killed, and also look at cases where the free market economy screws people over to the extent where they're getting screwed over in the United States, with the added barrier of racism that's so entrenched, even Barack Obama himself, probably the only black person that won't be shot by the police for sure over the next year and a half, says that the situation is so bad that he doesn't have any clue how to change it. Then they tell us, they talk a lot about the UK. And I understand the frustration with the UK leaving the EU, as both of them are there just because the UK isn't the EU in opening up. But they offer us no analysis to why we should care as a European Union to keep a United Kingdom that's constantly pushing for things like, you know, lighter regulation of banks, that's like keeping us behind from having like a proper open border policy in the EU, doesn't participate in our currency union, weakening our efforts, and so on and so forth. We don't really see why we should care about the United Kingdom of such. Moreover, we're going to contend that the UK has enough vested interest in the European Union entirely that even when it comes to the referendum, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, is going to campaign in favour of staying inside in order not to lose the comparative advantage the city has over, let's say, Dublin and other financial markets in Europe. They say English is only spoken in the UK, trying to storm on our argument that these migrants, they're like these new migrants, refugees, whatever you want to call them, the new African Americans within the European Union will have an easier job of integrating and offering to those societies. It's worth noting that English also happens to be by far the widest spoken language within the European Union. It is the lingua franca of business within the European Union. We think that they're far better off than, for instance, migrants from South Asia and North East that come over here and can't even speak the language. And eventually they give birth to people like you. Now, they say that we're facing a crisis, forgetting that the crisis was caused by the very fact that we don't have enough young people in the European Union to pay for our welfare systems and pay for the people that basically need their pensions now, right? We have an aging society because we haven't been good enough at making enough babies. Having an influx of young migrants can actually help that. Go.
But aren't you being naive, assuming that there is no racism at all in the EU?
There is racism, but like, you know, to cut this long story short, every time the EU has responded to a humanitarian crisis, and the EU has said responded to a humanitarian crisis, the people coming in haven't been subject to the same forces of racism that economic migrants from South Asia and other places have faced. You may have had isolated incidents in the Greek border that Carolina might want to talk about, of people not understanding what a refugee is, but in the long run, we see that government integration policies, which is the key, have been far better at integrating people, for instance, from Syria, a place where the public believes there's a genuine need for them to actually be integrated. Racism exists in all societies, at least in the European Union. Our police officers do not shoot people because of the color of their skin, which happens to be the case in the United States of America. We don't have comparable cases within the European Union, where more and more countries are even taking like active legislative stances against, for instance, racial profiling, something that the United States hasn't even happened. They talk about US-European Union relations. A couple of points. First of all, Russia is a bigger problem for the EU just because we have to do what America wants and America says. The European Union, shockingly, would be better off if we could take a more neutral stance against Russia, because we're the ones that have countries like Poland, Hungary, Baltic states, and so on and so forth. They're actually on the line by Russian aggression, when the European Union is literally just in the middle of like a fist fight between the United States and Russia, for the most part. Right? We don't have the same interests with America. We also hear the same speech that China is on the rise, so why should we care about America that's becoming rapidly relevant and not align ourselves with other countries in the world, like China, like Russia, that therefore could be more beneficial for the European Union that needs to assert itself as a power in its own right. Now, they also tell us that, finally, that we're going to worsen the situation for other minorities in the United States. A couple of points here. First of all, no minority in the United States has it as badly as the African Americans. If there's a case where, for instance, Chinese people within the United States or people of basic characteristics start getting shot by the police, let's come here together and discuss it and let them in as well, right? We don't think that any other minority is facing the same sort of trouble the African Americans are facing. We see that Hispanics, for instance, are far better, like in total opposition to the lie I told you in the previous round. They're just fine within the Republican Party. They've managed, for instance, to get themselves to high position of power. They have governors, they have everything. The African Americans are the ones that have it actually worse off. They say that's going to be a triumph for racists. We think that finally we're creating an incentive for the United States to finally better the situation of African Americans, to stop this exodus of African Americans from the United States of America to elsewhere, because they're going to lose a large part of the labor force, they're going to lose a large part of their economic potential, because at some point we assume America wants to come out of the crisis and needs working hands and people to pay for welfare. So because we think that they're subject to enough physical and economic violence that merits international protection to beat the mentality that sent them, in the miserable households in the United States of America, because we think that these people are far easier to integrate than pretty much everyone else the European Union has taken in recently, because we don't think the EU is going to collapse as a result of this, and because we think that the EU should show leadership in human rights first before it tries to spread it to places like in Ukraine, we proudly beg to propose.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister very much and indeed the Open Government for their remarks. I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to answer. Hear, hear.
You don't protect human rights by putting people into uncertain situations, the outcomes of which they cannot be sure that they're actually going to help them. You don't protect human rights by letting people stop caring about their own governments, about cities and families with which they live, in places that they care about, that they would like to influence, but you give them an easy way out that might be a stimulus for everyone to just start, for their societies to be disintegrating. We don't think human rights is only about your safety, and even though it is largely about that, we also don't think that this is something that is critically endangered when it comes to the African Americans. We think that to a large extent, what you really need to be capable of is, when you even want to frame it as asylum seekers and refugees, is that you need to be able to improve their lives, which we cannot guarantee. But also, we don't agree on principle that is the debate about people who are essentially asylum seekers. So what I'm going to be talking about is tell you that we think that it's really important that within the EU we also have racism. This racism is going to even go further, because the platforms that the far right uses are usually interconnecting a lot of different aspects. So it's not only racism, but there's also a platform of anti-immigration and anti-EU, and the general feeling of anti-establishment. The problem is, what I'm going to explain, is that when you conflate all of those forces, this is why the reaction to that is going to be much, much stronger than what they would assume, and that the racism in Europe that we can currently see, like for example the Syrian refugees happen to be in a hunger strike in Greece, is not just an incident, but is actually systematically oppressing refugees. I think that in those cases it's really important that we talk about that. I'm also going to be really stressing how we think that the lives of all the other minorities, especially minorities like the illegal immigrants who come from South America and Southeast Asia to America, their lives are going to be much, much worse the moment we give this easy, but not really easy, way out of the oppressive system that the US, to a certain extent, perpetuates over its African Americans. Okay, just in terms of a few points of rebuttal. So from CG, we just hear this like POI on it doesn't really matter, not that many people are going to come here, and this is a similar situation like Bulgaria and Romania, for example, right? Like it seems that they're hinting at that. The problem is, even though only a few Bulgarians and Romanians moved to the UK, note two things. First of all, that a lot of Poles moved because they had cultural ties, which is exactly the similar situation the African Americans are going to have because they do have cultural ties to the UK. And second of all, because we think that, you know, on the one hand, yes, not that many Bulgarians and Romanians came, but there are not that many Bulgarians and Romanians, and there are a lot of African Americans in an entire continent that America is. And we think with countries like Slovenia having 2 million people, or Greece having 11 million people, it's fairly significant that such a large group of people is going to come to Europe. Okay, we think that what is really, really important in this debate is that EU also is not an ideal place in which you want to live necessarily. And offering somebody a false promise of protecting their human rights on the basis of I want to seem better than America and I want to stick to my principles that I cannot really provide for you, we think that's something really damaging for those people and for the European Union. Because when you look at this, when you look at racial divides in Europe, you at least have an African American president in the US. We don't even have in Europe almost anyone in governments or in positions that represent anyone of any minorities that are huge in Europe as well, right? You note, like, when you look at Paris, all the schools that are on the outskirts of Paris where poorer people live, they're also racially divided. So it is not as simple as to say, well, you know, we are slightly better than that. It's just that because the scale of the problem, the scale of the problem is smaller, because we look at it on the country by country basis, right? So we look at discrimination in one country in Europe, discrimination in another country in Europe, a problem of a particular group. But what we overlook by this in Europe is that because we have a diverse pool of immigrants, we overlook the fact that all of them are systematically disadvantaged but each group is systematically disadvantaged in a slightly different way. The problem is, if you introduce a larger number of people from the same group, it is just the same type of, those people are going to be confined to, again, try to fit into the new communities they're going to come to. So, for example, they're going to join the other people who are of African descent in cities and places already in Europe, which are very often economically disadvantaged. We don't think, you need to explain to us how those people who, they do not know how our governments work, they do not know to such an extent what are the differences. They're not going to be the ones who like create jobs and jobs that are able to be entrepreneurs and stuff. Because, you know, laws are different. It's not immediately that you immigrate somewhere, you have all the ideas and all the knowledge, and it was the American system that was blocking you. There are successful people who are African Americans in America, and the important thing is, it's not simply that easy that you succeed in a place just because you think there is a bit less of racism. You need to know the place quite well, and you need to know the rules of the government in order to be successful. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about the next thing I want to talk about is what we think how it would damage the US, and we think it's really, really important. Because when you look at this, and when you look at the fact that, you know, the things that are happening in the US right now, is there's actually so much media attention on all the violence that happened by the police, and these are limited cases of 15 or something like that people. We think it's still outrageous, but that does not change the fact that those cases gathered so much media attention. Why do we think that it's critical, and why we don't want this gone, in a sense that we don't want the media attention to be gone from the issue by the fact that they move to the EU, or that the EU offers them to move. We want the discussion to happen in the US because, as I already told you, we think those people have families, lives, and you know, they want to be there. I'll take the POI in the middle of this.
Yeah, but like, you know, the media attention in the world, the 2 cops that shot the 2 black kids, that both free, the other guy that shot a black one outside.
Yeah, but we think America needs the discussion because, as I've already pointed out, and Julia pointed out, African Americans are not the only groups of immigrants in the EU, in America. All the illegal immigrants that come from South America or from Southeast Asia are equally endangered to become the next group that is going to be systematically disadvantaged by the state. Well, they actually are already systematically disadvantaged by the state, and even more than African Americans to a large extent because they are illegal immigrants and nobody wants to grant them citizenship, right? So why not let them in as well, right? The problem is, though, if you divide if you allow people who normally have the incentive because of their systematic disadvantage, they suddenly start to realize, and they realize that they have to be united in fighting against that systemic disadvantage. That is what the current media attention shows. You need those people to have they can have the similar voting patterns that are able to relieve the communities of immigrants and relieve the communities that are systematically disadvantaged from the fact that there is a systemic oppression against them, right? You need those people to have you need people who have an interest in improving their own situation. And we have galvanized that interest right now. And at this point in time, relieving the pressure from the American government, from the leaders of the African American community, and from the leaders of the left communities that want to improve their lives, relieving the pressure is just simply something that is not going to improve the state of minorities in the United States. And for those reasons, we beg you to.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition very much, and indeed the entire first half. So, to the second half of this debate, we hear call upon the Member of Government. Here.
The American dream is dead, and the EU should be the first vulture to feed on this cup. Okay? Now I'll explain exactly why. Our main point of extension will be how this actually appeases communities within the EU and why that's very important for tensions inside the EU. And secondly, why it's important to hijack the status that the US has had as a champion of equality and a champion of rights, and why that's bad, right? Because actually, we do like immigration, and we're going to explain about that as well. But really fast to tackle this whole idea, which is, the whole case was mainly on cultural tensions in the EU, which I will mostly deal with in my own points, and then explain why they really got it wrong and they don't really understand what's happening. And also, they have this whole idea of like how it damages the US, how it takes away media attention on violence. Firstly, there was no analysis on why this would actually go. We think there will be more media attention at the moment. There is the possibility of, lots of African Americans moving away from the country. And we think that actually adds more pressure to the US to actually do something, not just, send the military there or like send more weapons to shoot down the black people. Maybe now you'll think, well, they might flee away. Maybe they should make sure they have rights and they stay in our country. Right? So we don't see also why this doesn't mean that it's necessarily good. We think the amount of violence that exists is also perpetuated by the fact that there's so much anger and frustration, and this would actually act as a buffer to that, right? We think that giving them another option, which is apparently the easy way out, right? Because not being choked to death, not being shot, is the easy way out. I agree with that, right? But we still should give it to them, right? If they don't want to deal with that, if they don't want to have that fight, they're more than welcome to come in the EU, right? Also note, if they don't like it in the EU, they can go back, right? Like they keep saying we're giving them false promises and we're trapping them somehow here. It's opposite to asylum seekers who sometimes don't have the option of going back to Syria because they will be killed. These people can go back to the US if they really don't like it in the UK, or like in other parts of the EU, right? So we're not trapping them in any sort of way. We have no analysis of like we're offering them a fake dream. Although again, we think opening has proven why the EU is still much better for them than the US, right? And then they went on that whole thing about my which is really a red herring. I don't really care that much how many people come into the EU. And also, note, they've also not really proven and like done anything about that. It's just say the UK will break down, the US will break down, right? And we really expect slightly more analysis on that. So really fast, let's talk about multiculturalism and communities, and this will tackle the whole idea of like far-right parties and giving them power. Firstly, I don't see a reason why we should give in to like far-right parties, right? Even though this might boost them, let's say, that doesn't necessarily mean we should do a policy or not do a policy simply because it gives this voice more power. Secondly, let's actually look at cultural tensions in the EU, right? Because the problems that like the UK has with Romanians and with Bulgarians is not so much that they're immigrants that go for work, it's because the way that it works in the EU is it's very easy to make them sound as if they come for benefits, right? Guess what? If you're a migrant coming for work, you don't have the same access to rights as Romanians have in the UK, right? Which is why you can find this really, really easy to make it seem as if all Romanians go and get those benefits. So, by the way, it's not right, and the report that Theresa May has refused to push forward showed that actually there's less benefits than that. Also, we have never really proven, there's no improvement why even if this would happen, Nigel Farage will actually have the power. And we do think the UK will not find it necessarily incentive to leave the EU just because there's more migrants. And if they do, fine. We've also not done analysis, and there were questions on this, of why we should care about the UK. No analysis whatsoever there again, right? But even more, the way that cultural tensions work in the EU is mostly based on religion. It's not based on race. Look at Denmark and the problem that it has with Muslim communities. Look at France, the problem that it has with Muslim communities because of its concept of laïcité, right? The problem is, they always associate black people and Muslim people, right? The moment we have lots of black people and African Americans from the US, which will break down that stereotype, we think it's good. We think it will not increase tensions because, again, most of the tensions that exist in Europe are either because of the whole benefit thing, which is specifically to Romanians and Bulgarians, and we don't think they can add this rhetoric to African Americans because of how they would receive their rights. But moreover, the cultural tensions exist because of religion mostly, and because how these countries actually will be good. Yeah.
But you will just create another Turkish minority problem in Germany, because if these people not just go to UK, but go to other countries, they won't be speaking the local language, they are more likely to stick together, and then will be not be integrated.
Note, vast communities in the US also speak French. For example, if you come from New Orleans, you're more likely to actually speak French. So not all of the US just speaks English, right? Different people can speak different languages, shockingly enough. Right? Also, because they're not like in Syria where you have to leave otherwise you die, they will most likely be able to more research and see if they can actually adapt to Europe, right? They won't just book a ticket and fly over, and we think there's more of a connection there. But even more, let's talk about our other essential, the champion of rights, because we're way more cynical in the bottom half. We don't really care about whether they're going to do better in the US that much. We care about whether the EU is actually going to do better and whether the EU actually gets something good from this, right? Which we think that from a certain perspective doesn't matter exactly what happens to them in the long run. First of all, we think it's been really difficult lately, especially in the national position, because Europe is more and more irrelevant, right? We have less power, especially no, thank you. Especially in connection with other groups. And whereas the US has always been champion of rights, now it's time to hijack that by seeming the champions of multiculturalism and equality. Not only does the whole hashtag Black Lives Matter have a lot of political capital behind it, which we should actually engage with, and we should play on that, but also because we think that Europe has tried always to make it seem as if it's the champion of equality and multiculturalism. And this is a great way. We show them that when people in other countries, especially the US, suffer because of their race and suffer because of their culture, we will open our arms to them, right? And we think that that not only sends a good message towards the communities inside of Europe, because again, that political capital mostly exists from those communities, and they will be appeased and there will be less tensions that they have towards the government. But we also think that we become more appealing to other countries. We always want to have immigrants because we want to have the best immigrants. We love Indian immigrants that are really, really smart, and we want them to continue to come here, despite not us insulting everyone on the panel, right? We want them. We think they're really good. We think that otherwise, we continuously lose the appeal. The more we appeal to them, because look, in our wonderful European Union, you will not be shot to death because of your color, right? Because of your skin. We think we become appealing not only for investment, we become appealing for rich people, which would rather live in our country rather than in the US. And we like rich people because they pay taxes. We like smart people because when we have immigrants, we want to have the best immigrants, right? Because guess what? We love to brainwash other countries as well. So us, on the bottom half, we like to be cynical because we think that the EU needs to do whatever it suits its best. But all friends on the international sphere only as much as it benefits us. America won't do anything. America has been spying on us despite the importance of our relationship and has been doing a lot of things that we don't like each other, right? But we will still be united because we never had any analysis of why the US will stop trade or whatever they think the sanctions from the US would be, right? But we can hijack their ability to be appealing on the national sphere. We can hijack that possibility. We can also make sure that our communities inside do understand that multiculturalism isn't there, despite the far right-wing movement. So for those reasons, we do think Black Lives Matter, and we do think the Europe should actually
We thank the member of government very much. We call upon the member of opposition here.
Mr. Speaker, I have 2 points. First, I'm going to explain to you how it will harm the African American movement within the United States and how will it be really, really terrible for this country. And secondly, I'm going to explain to you what kind of problems we will face within the EU and how it will make the life worse for those people who think that it will be better. But before that, I have 5 points of rebuttal. First, we didn't get any proper analysis that why we chose African Americans in the status quo, like in this proposal. I mean, there are so many other countries, there are so many other minority groups who are facing really, really horrible situations. Like, for instance, there's a Kurdish minority living in Turkey. They have been also shot by the police. They've been also facing really horrible lives, but we are not choosing them. So I need to understand why African Americans are especially in the sense that they need to be protected, especially considering the fact that roughly if there are like 30 million of African Americans living in the United States, let's assume that 10% of will come, that makes like 7 million people are coming, in a sense that it's a huge amount of numbers. No, thank you. Secondly, they assume that integration will be fast, but I don't buy this. Because the thing is, integration is not something that you can claim will happen so easily. Because even if they come to UK or any other country which they even speak this language, this doesn't mean that they can integrate culturally. I mean, they use different metric system, for instance, but apart from that, they have a different mentality. They have different kinds of doing things, and Europeans and Americans are not necessarily the same people. They don't have the same cultural background. They don't racism because now they are seeing that people are leaving. No, they can replace the people who are leaving by the Mexican people. They can accept much more people if the only motivation is the labor force. They can hire much more people from other countries. They don't need African Americans. Fourthly, they say that, well, they are facing racism in USA, now they won't be shot by the police in the EU. That's a lie. People are still shot by the police in the EU. Even if you are running from a metro, a black person was shot in the EU by the police because he was considered dangerous. These kind of stereotypes exist everywhere. It's not just US. USA is not a famous. USA is not in another planet. We watch the same movies. We are exposed to the same kind of stereotypes, and we also have racism. But moreover, even if they are not going to be shot by the police, that doesn't mean they are not going to face racism. It will be still more difficult for them to find a job. There will be still racial profiling. I mean, in the world's Berlin, there was a racial profiling to the delegate of black debaters. Even that happened by the German police. We experience that. We think that it will be within the majority of the cases. And lastly, we don't buy that when the closing team says that, well, we want smart immigrants. We already have that. It's called being expat. We already hiring them. If you're a smart African American who is already have a good education, you already come to EU, you can already find a job by yourself. You don't need this policy. Let's begin. We believe that harms of the African American rights movement will be harmed because we believe that the people who are coming to EU with this policy will be the people who are already well off, who can already find jobs, who can already be in a situation where they are middle class or upper middle class, which are the people who don't necessarily face with the racism every single day. You are not going to make it easier for people who are living in Ferguson or in the Harlem to come to EU because they cannot afford a flight ticket. They cannot afford the risk of this investment to find accommodation, to find a place for themselves. So we think that what you are saving are the people who are already can save themselves if they try a little bit harder. And we don't think that this is a good way of doing this. Because what you are doing is that you actually decrease the critical mass of the African American people in the movement. We believe that means that there will be less people who are staying in the United States who cannot afford this and facing the racism in every single day of their life. And even the amount of the problems depends on the amount of the people who are having these problems. And if you can form a critical mass, then you can have actually demand the changes from your government, or then you can actually create an interest group and demand the rights to be better in your sense. Yes?
Yeah, in Florida, for instance, black people are disproportionately charged with minor petty theft and deprived of the right to vote, like thus a systemic barrier for them to actually achieve any change. How does America get better in your world?
I am saying that the change is happening. We are much better than 20 years ago. The change is something that continues to happen. 10 years later, it will be better off. But what I don't understand is what you had to prove how their life was going to be better within the EU, which you failed to do. And I'm going to explain how there will be more problems. But moreover, we believe that the critical mass and the change is something really crucial to gaining the rights within the society. And if you are especially getting rid of the people in the United States who already have accumulated capital and already have the means to fight to the government and create a lobbying power, that means the rest of the people will have less accumulated political capital and less capital to fight against this kind of racism and less power to lobby against the government or lobby against racism, which harms the movement within the American society and African American rights. Secondly, problems with the EU. Well, housing problem, because the prices of the housing will rise, because there will be so many people coming there. Unemployment problem, because there won't be so many jobs within the EU. These are practical problems, but they are true, they will be true. And we think that these are the things that our citizens shouldn't subsidize, because we have a responsibility to our citizens first, because they elected us, because we are financing these kind of things. We are financing ourselves as EU with their taxes, and therefore we have a responsibility to make sure that they are getting their rights in the first place and then care about the other things. We cannot just say that, well, we took part in the slavery, that's why we have a responsibility. No, I didn't take part in the slavery. I have nothing to do with that. It was many years ago, and therefore I shouldn't pay that with my taxes. No, neither you. So in that sense, but the racism in EU is still a problem. Right-wing extremism is increasing. There is so much scapegoating. There is so many problems, and we think that African American people will be the people who will be facing this in a widespread way. So ready to oppose.
We thank the member of government very much. We call upon, sorry, the member of opposition very much. We call upon the government whip to finish for his bench here.
Mr. Speaker, what would you do if you were asked to give up your dreams for freedom? Freedom isn't free. It costs folks like you and me, and if you don't put in your Loco 5, who will? What is our case? Look, we tell you that as EU, we want to be the most attractive union in the world, we want to push the progress across the globe to fix all the systemic issues that Manos rightly highlights in his speech, right? And we get that by becoming the champion of equal rights, of hijacking that status from the US. And we tell you by doing this, look, we get the best people, we get the best investment, we get international legitimacy, we get diplomatic power, and we reaffirm our commitment to multiculturalism, a concept that, as rightly pointed out, is waning across the EU right now, and therefore impact our commitment to solidarity and inequality, to righting inequality in the communities where these injustices exist, right? And we basically say that this case hits the three most important objectives that the EU and all other countries like the Impact Lady are trying to fix right now. We want to be a more progressive, more powerful, more integrated trading bloc, and this increase in strength and legitimacy is good for members of the EU and also for powers outside of it who are dependent on it and who are suffering from similar injustices. Okay, so how do we do this? So let's just go through some of the stuff that just the opposition has come. So they're going to say, well, look, this is going to destabilize the EU. It's going to collapse all these problems of minorities. They tell us about existing problems of immigration and the galvanization of right-wing parties when the waves of black minorities come in to the EU. Exactly, right? And this disadvantages other minorities in this case, right? And so you might give you like a number of responses to this. So first thing he said, first of all, there's absolutely no reason why we should try and appease right-wing parties who just happen to currently be anti-immigration, given these things are kind of controversial, but more on an impactful level, right? So the problem, there's a fundamental difference between the type of immigrants that are coming from the US and the type of immigrants that are in the EU. The problem, so for instance, discrimination against Romanians and other people from Eastern Europe, is the perception that they haven't come here to work, right? They're here to take advantage of so you get poor people so you get immigrants from poor countries moving to slightly richer countries, and they're there to take advantage of the systemic problems, and they end up becoming very integrated, and you get ghettoization and the isolation of these minorities and everything. So you get this kind of scrounger culture. But we say that doesn't happen when the type of immigrants are coming over, immigrants on work permits, right? So individuals, probably the type of people aren't going to be the poorest in American society, that do not have the money to move out, right? It's probably going to be just above that, lower middle class individuals who have the ability to research, where Europe is, right? Which countries probably have jobs, what type of job they can do, right? So these are the type of people who've done that research, who know what they're doing, right? No, thank you. Okay, so the reason these individuals are moving is fundamentally different. They're moving to pursue this the dream, right? The American dream that's dying because the system is failing, and they're trying to pursue it in the EU, and they can do that because they're researching. And we think that they can therefore they can avoid the harmful immigration, the other problems of immigration rhetoric that a lot of minorities who are facing that in Europe are currently facing. They can avoid that because they are coming to work, they are coming to be productive, and there is a general perception that the US is one of the richest countries in the world, and they do actually produce stuff. And finally, so we see that a lot of the tensions in the EU are predicated on historical religious prejudices, so the equivalation between being black and being Muslim. We break that down and we show that this is a way in which minorities can move into these countries, be productive, be integrative, right? Next bit. I'll take you.
Okay, communist regimes attempted to reorganize or reconfigure society by circumventing public opinion. You are trying to do exactly the same thing, but this time you have the far right that is going to hijack the entire discussion that you would like to have a very new free world.
Okay. So first of all, we just don't think that that's the way that these parties work, right? We think that a lot of these far right-wing parties are firstly have very strong ethnic, religious concentration within their camp, right? And a lot of their hatred is directed towards very specific ethnic minorities and very specific religious groups. Probably the type not directed towards the types of immigrants that are going to be coming over, right? Okay, so let's go through. So what have we heard from the government? So basically we've got that. So the government tells us middle class black families who might move out are now just kind of Syrian refugees, and therefore we have a responsibility to alleviate them from the systemic oppression that they face. We absolutely agree. Maus is a champion of the people. We love his case. But what this leads to is the visibility of issues in the US and that to change, and therefore as the EU we should care about that and we get more of an integration between the US and the EU, and that directly challenges what others say in terms of these relationships are going to break down. In closing, we're a little bit more cynical, but we are a little bit more selfish. We say, well, it's good that the US has an incentive now to aggressively right the system of inequality and gives a better platform for We tell you that it's the capturing of that title of champion of the champion of rights, of being the new land of opportunity that brings to us the most benefits of the union, that brings the most benefits to most people in and outside that union in terms of looking for other opportunity. Because Joanne tells you on this champion of rights, the Black Lives Matter hashtag carries a lot of political capital. At the moment, writing these types of injustices, when states that can effectively tackle these rights and have a commitment to tackling these rights are the most attractive places, and places where it becomes ingrained in the cultural norm that this type of inequality is bad, right? And basically what we do, in terms of alleviating tensions in the EU for the commitment to EU rights, because in areas where there is systemic violence against minorities, like Bosniaks in Serbia, like Muslims in Denmark, like Turks in Germany, so a EU commitment to the protection of the most visible form of minority rights abuse currently going on, probably leads to a set of very solid regulations and to make those migrants can effectively integrate into those communities, right? Those types of policies, that type of commitment is probably likely to extend to other minorities in those areas who are suffering from the same types of abuse, right? And we said that commitment, first of all, it just alleviates the tensions that some of these immigrant communities are facing in the EU, right? We think that takes down a lot of that stuff about how there's going to be all this backlash, because ultimately we're now empowering a lot of the people who are suffering from problems to lobby or to at least feel the benefits of the extra work that's going to be taken in order to make sure that these immigrants can integrate. But second of all, it's going to appeal massively to outside countries, countries outside the EU, countries outside the US, who basically are looking for that same type of commitment to the protection of minority rights, right? We ultimately say that when you have, because at the moment there is no, America was the champion of human rights. They were the one land of opportunities, the one place where traditionally immigrants have gone over centuries and centuries and they've been poor, right? So it's where the Italians went there, it's where the Irish went there, when there was a famine after the war, right? People left because things were bad. At the moment, there isn't currently a safe haven for people who are suffering these types of oppression, right? And we find that when we do have that, when we have a solid anchoring point for the protection of rights, for the protection of individual autonomy, and for a state that is committed to the progression and to solve the problems of all the segregation they talk about, that acts as an anchoring point for development outside of that union and offers protection to people inside that union, right? Given this is a global debate, and given that we can impact both spheres, we beg you to propose.
We would like to thank the government whip and indeed the entire government bench for their contributions. In order to finish this debate completely, we now call upon the opposition wish to finish the debate. Here.
Mr. Speaker, two clashes in this debate. First, is it better for the European Union, this policy? And the second one, is it better for the African Americans and the lobby of the African Americans within the United States? But first, 2 points of rebuttal. So we heard from closing that, black people will cause more tolerance within the European Union because nowadays we have intolerance because we associate immigrants with Muslims, Muslim values, and we only have this religious bias that we see against immigrants. However, this contradicts with his own point by saying if the UK has problems with Romania, and Romania is itself not a Muslim country, right? That we have also problems with other minorities. That if you bring African Americans to the European Union, you don't solve that particular problem. But politicians will always blame minorities if they have a different religion or if they have just a different skin color. It doesn't really matter for people who try to blame someone. So that's why their point is false. But also, we just heard that, okay, the European Union is the union of multiculturalism. But isn't that the United States? Initially, wasn't the United States the country of a melting pot where all ethnicities live happily next to each other? So if the United States can't cope with that, then how is the European Union doing that with all its internal problems it's already facing? Also, the US has a far higher labor mobility than the European Union, which also makes integration to the society more likely than to the European Union. But first, now to the two clashes. So we heard the first one about if it's better for the European Union. We first talked about the UK, and first Gulf was okay that we would leave the UK out of the European Union. They may leave. But the problem is that by leaving the UK, the European Union gets less powerful, the voice is less heard, and that's just important for globalized society, for globalized world, where the European Union is shrinking and needs the UK in order to stay relevant in this world. But more importantly is if the UK is not there anymore, people will go to other countries such as France, Germany, where they don't speak the language. It makes it far less likely that they will eventually integrate into the society. And then we heard their main point was basically about the European Union that will boost European Union's economy. Well, who are the people that will actually go to the European Union? It's we heard from First Gov that it's actually the unemployed people, the young people that don't have any perspective in the United States. But if they're going to come, how are they going to boost our economy? How are they going to boost our economy if we have unemployment rates of 50% of unemployment in Southern Europe? It's a contradiction in itself. Yes, on that point.
Yeah, your reality check is really cute, but like Syria has 20 million people, others have even more. Would you stop taking in refugees entirely just because there's a chance that a far-right politician here or Britain might have a
No, I don't accept this comparison with Syria, because in Syria there's a war going on, a civil war, people are being killed. In the United States, yes, there have been cases of people being killed by the police, but it's not hundreds of thousands that were of atrocities because of civil war, because people had to flee there in order to save their lives. It's not a civil war going on in the United States. Please admit this fact. So then we also heard that, yes, we would integrate them very well in certain districts. But this rests also on the assumptions, well, this is also very unlikely with their assumption that young, uneducated people will actually come. Because also my partner has shown you that even if the more educated people come, they still have a different mentality here, and they can't just come and be fully integrated here. So my partner made it really clear that the European economy is also stagnating while the US economy is actually boosting. So there's no capacity right now in terms of employment rates, especially. Is what she made very clear, that we have so many unemployed people here that there's just not the economic demand for more employed people. So why should then eventually the question stands in the room? Why should we prefer African Americans over our own citizens if we cannot cope with our own citizens? If we cannot cope with 10-20% of the people who are being neglected in our society because they have no work, because they have no perspective? Not now. But the more important point here is if it will actually increase or make the situation better for the African Americans and the lobby in the United States. So we heard that, okay, they would get work in the European Union. That's already an assumption that's very hard for them to prove, given the high unemployment rate here. But furthermore, about about getting more work and integrating into society. So they would have to learn a new language in the case that UK leaves the European Union, which are you in favor of. They would, in the case that hundreds of thousands of people are just not needed for our economy. No. And so they would probably not go to Greece, Spain, Italy. They would go to the more well-off countries such as Scandinavia, Germany. But there is already violence towards and hostility towards immigrants there that in the status quo. We saw 3 days ago that in Munich 3 asylum houses were burned down by right-wing groups. So there's in Scandinavia there are right-wing radicals being more relevant. So my partner has shown you, and most importantly, is that she has given you a lot of analysis of why the lobby is actually suffering in the United States, as a lot of people are leaving. If you make this policy relevant, a lot of people are leaving. So first of all, the just percentage of African Americans decreases in the United States. So the minority becomes even a smaller minority, having less political capacity. But also the problem is that those who are bold enough, those who want to face change, they are ready to go. They will go. But those could have changed then the status quo in the United States more, because the status quo is changing. Looking back at the last 100 years, what improvement we have, that they are actually being equal in every sense. It's just that we don't have full equality anymore, but there is this trend going towards that. And those people who are bold enough would go, they are then leaving the United States, so there's eventually then no change anymore, or far less change, and this is clearly bad, so we will not make fascists. Therefore, I'm proud to propose this.
speakers. Can we please have one round of applause for all 8 speakers? The adjudication panel will now retire and come back with the decision or not. So, without further ado, we had okay discussion. We really did discuss all 4 teams. We thought it was a good, fun debate, and we enjoyed watching it and enjoyed thinking of what we would have run. In the end, in a unanimous decision, we gave the win to the team in open government. These wonderful tokens of appreciation, which include a lot of Polish memorabilia. Congratulations, very nicely done. Congratulations. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you again in the Warsaw Open.